If you've never piped buttercream flowers before and you'd like to give it a try, I'm going to show you how to pipe these really easy little daffodils straight onto your cupcake. They look really cute and you only need a couple of piping tips to do them. I'll show you the colours I've used here. I like to use these gel colours. You just squirt and mix, they're really lovely to use. For the centres I've used Colour Splash Sunflower, and then for the petals on the outside I've used some Colour Splash Lemon, and I added a little bit of the sunflower in just to tone it down a bit. So they're the yellows I've used, and then for the green I've used my favourite green. This is Pro Gel Olive Green. So I'm using American buttercream to pipe this with, and you'll find the recipe on my channel that I like to use. And the piping tips I'm using for the petals is a Wilton 352. It's known as a bird's beak because of its shape. You want to always make sure that you point where you want your leaf or petal to be, and when you squeeze the buttercream it oozes out the sides of that V and it gives you this lovely pointy shape. For the centre of the daffodil, I'm using a Wilton 80. It's this smiley shaped tip. This groove in the middle of the piping tip is what gives the petals their shape. So you always want to make sure that that groove's in the middle when you're piping. If you haven't got a Wilton 80, you can use a 79 or an 81. They're slightly different sizes, but they're the same shape. Now with this same yellow here, I'm also going to use a number 3 round piping tip. It's just a very small round. Now I don't use couplers when I'm piping, so if I'm going to use the same colour, I load up my buttercream into one bag and snip a little bit off the end of that, and then I can pop the piping tip on top like that, and you can easily change it around. I don't use couplers because piping tips are often different sizes, so I always use this method. Snip another little bit off the end of another piping bag and you can pop that in and it's ready to use. So it's a really quick and easy way of changing your piping tips. I've got a 103 petal shaped tip here, but I'm only going to use the base of that to mark out where I want my flowers to be. You can eyeball it, but it's really handy to put in a little marker so you get them evenly spaced. So the first thing you want to do is crumb coat your cupcake with a layer of green buttercream, and we'll put 3 circles on it. So I'm going to come in from the edge of the cupcake a little bit so I've got room to put my petals. Place the piping tip on the cake like this and make a little mark, and then we'll space 2 more up here. So just have a little look and make sure it's where you like it, and then put the next one in, make sure they're even, and that's your 3 markers done. So to pipe the daffodils, I'm going to take up the 352 leaf tip, push all the buttercream down to the bottom of the bag, and you don't want too much buttercream in the bag. You want to be able to have a palmful size amount, but not much more than that. I like to wrap that top bit around my thumb, and then I twist the bag to make sure it's nice and tight. You always want it tight when you're piping so you've got full control over the buttercream. Make sure you've got the point of the piping tip in the right place so you get that shape. And then I'm going to pop some petals around this first circle here. So come down onto the cupcake. You want to touch down with the piping tip on the edge of that circle. Squeeze the buttercream so that a big bit comes out and sticks to the cake, and then slowly lift, stop and come off. Then I'm going to turn the cupcake and put one in opposite. So touch down on that circle, squeeze the buttercream so it sticks to the cake, then slowly lift, stop and come off. and then you'll get your 2 petals like this. I'm going to put in opposite each other now, so they'll overlap ever so slightly. Come next to that petal, touch down, squeeze, lift, stop and come off, and then turn the cake, and I'll pop another one in here so it is going to overlap. Touch down, squeeze, lift, stop and come off, and then I'll fill in these 2 here, so I'll come on the inside, put 2 more petals, and that's the first daffodil complete. Now we move on to the next circle. We'll do exactly the same thing. I'm going to come in between those 2 petals of the first one so that it overlaps a little bit. So touch down, squeeze, then lift, stop and come off, and you've got this nice overlapping flower. Do the other one opposite. Now come in either side of those 2 petals. Always turn your cake so that your piping hand is in the right place. And then last one on there. Now before I do this last one, I want to tighten up my piping bag because it's gone a little bit splodgy. So just put the cake down, tighten up your bag, and then you're ready to pipe again. Always want to make sure you've got a nice tight bag. So I'm going to touch down in the middle and pull up, touch down, squeeze, lift and come off. And then the next 2 next to those petals, you've got to mind your hand with your other flowers. And then the last one. And there's your petals already on there. Take up your Wilton 80 to make the centres, and again you want to push all your buttercream down to the bottom, not too much in your bag, and make sure that it's nice and tight. If you've got any buttercream coming out the bottom like this, just wipe it off on a piece of paper towel before you start piping. Make sure you've got the groove of that piping tip in the middle, so you create the correct shape. And I'm going to come straight down into the center, touch down, squeeze, then slowly lift, stop and come off. Turn the cake, do the same thing again, so come right next to that one, touch down, squeeze, lift, stop and come off. So you go around the center of each of your flowers, touch down, squeeze, lift, stop and come off, and put as many of these in as you need to just fill the centers up. You'll have a little gap in the middle still. Touch, squeeze, lift, come off. And then to fill in those centers, I'm going to swap the piping tip over for a number 3. You can load up another piping bag with the number 3 in it, or if you haven't got a tiny round, you can just snip a really tiny piece off the end of a piping bag and use that. So push all that buttercream down to the bottom. Oops. And then make sure your piping bag's nice and tight. And then I'm going to come down into the center of each of these and pull up some little stamen. So we're going to touch down, squeeze, lift, stop and come off. Touch, squeeze, lift, come off. And you only need to put as many of these in as it takes to fill the gap. Nobody's going to count them. Now to fill in the spaces between the flowers, I've got a number 4 round piping tip here with some olive green buttercream. And you want to push all of the buttercream down to the bottom of the bag so it's nice and tight. Now I'm just going to touch down on the cake, squeeze, pull out a little leaf, stop and come off. And I'm angling them outwards towards the edge of the cupcake case so that you can cover that gap. So you just touch down, squeeze, pull out, stop and come off. And keep going round until you've filled in all the gaps around the flowers. You can make these all different lengths. If you haven't got the number 4 round piping tip, again you can just snip off the end of a piping bag. If you snip off a couple of millimeters, you'll have a small round that you can use. Now if you've got any gaps in the centre, before you go in there, you want to make sure that you wipe off your piping tip so that there's no buttercream on it before you start putting anything in the centre. I've only got room for 1 in here, but just make sure your piping tip's nice and clean. And there you go, that's how you add really simple, easy daffodils to your cupcakes. And then if you want to carry on learning how to pipe buttercream flowers, you can get more and more detail. It's addictive and so much fun to pipe. It's the most relaxing thing I've ever done. If you want to make cupcake bouquets with your buttercream flowers, I've also got tutorials on how to assemble and wrap them. Go to www.nicolajanecupcakebouquets.co.uk.